In the grand halls of history, Julius Caesar stands as one of the most recognizable figures, a man whose very name became synonymous with power. Yet the story most people know, the great Roman general cut down by betrayal on the Ides of March, is more myth than reality. To understand what really happened, we must step back into the final years of the Roman Republic, when one man's ambition and vision clashed with the old order, setting the stage for a bloody climax that would change the world forever. Caesar was not born into absolute power, but he was born with ambition that far exceeded his circumstances. A member of the patrician Julian clan, he tied his fate to popular politics, positioning himself as a champion of the people against the entrenched aristocracy of the Senate. Charismatic, daring, and willing to take risks that others would not, he steadily rose through the ranks. His military campaigns, especially in Gaul, transformed him from a skilled politician into a living legend. His commentaries on the Gallic Wars were more than military reports, they were propaganda, shaping his image as Rome's unstoppable conqueror. But behind the glory was also brutality. Caesar enslaved entire tribes, slaughtered thousands, and sought glory above all else. His return from Gaul brought him into direct conflict with the Senate and with Pompey the Great, his former ally turned rival. When he crossed the Rubicon River in 49 BCE, it was both a declaration of war and an act of destiny. The die is cast, Caesar is said to have declared, knowing that once he marched on Rome, there was no turning back. Civil war followed, and Caesar emerged victorious, cementing his control. He was not crowned king, but he was named dictator for life, a title that carried both reverence and dread in a society that prided itself on having overthrown kings centuries earlier. In the final months of his rule, Caesar's image was carefully cultivated, but cracks began to show. He wore a laurel crown constantly, perhaps to disguise his thinning hair, but some suspected it was also a symbol of monarchy. He accepted honors and divine worship that alarmed traditionalists. His health, too, was not as invincible as his reputation suggested. Ancient sources hint at seizures, likely epilepsy, that struck him at inconvenient times, reminders that even the greatest man in Rome was still flesh and blood. Yet Caesar seemed determined to craft himself into something more than mortal, edging dangerously close to the role of a god-king. For senators who still clung to the old republican ideals, this was intolerable. Men like Brutus and Cassius believed Caesar had gone too far, that he threatened to replace the republic with a monarchy. Others were motivated less by patriotism and more by jealousy, resentment, or fear of losing their own status. Together, they formed a conspiracy, over 60 senators sworn to strike at the heart of Rome's most powerful man. The assassination itself, immortalized in plays and paintings, was far more chaotic and brutal than the elegant depictions suggest. On the morning of March 15, 44 BCE, Caesar entered the theater of Pompey for a Senate meeting. He ignored multiple warnings, a dream from his wife Calpurnia, a soothsayer's cryptic words to beware the Ides of March. As he took his seat, the conspirators surrounded him. One senator approached with a petition, distracting him, while another pulled his toga. Then the first dagger flashed. Caesar cried out, staggered, and was struck again and again. Some accounts say he was stabbed 23 times, though only a few wounds were fatal. In the frenzy, senators stabbed one another by mistake. What was meant to be a noble act of liberation devolved into a blood-soaked spectacle. The famous words "Et tu, brute," may never have been spoken. Ancient sources differ. Some claim Caesar said nothing, covering his face with his toga in silent dignity. Others insist he did recognize Brutus, his former ally and perhaps even his illegitimate son, in the crowd of assassins, uttering words of betrayal that echoed through history. Whether fact or fiction, the phrase has come to symbolize the ultimate act of treachery. But what happened after was perhaps even more significant than the murder itself. The conspirators had imagined they would be hailed as liberators, restoring freedom to Rome. Instead, the city plunged into panic. Caesar's bloodied body lay abandoned, his toga soaked red, as chaos erupted outside. Citizens fled, fearful of civil war. Far from being celebrated, the assassins found themselves hated. To the common people, Caesar had been a hero, a benefactor who had given them land, games, and hope. His funeral, orchestrated by Mark Antony, turned into a fiery display of grief and rage. Antony read Caesar's will aloud, revealing that Caesar had left money to the Roman people and parks for public use. The crowd, incensed by his murder, rioted, attacking the homes of the conspirators. The Senate had tried to kill a king, but instead they had created a martyr. In the power vacuum that followed, Caesar's chosen heir, his great-nephew Octavian, would rise. The young man, barely 18, was underestimated by everyone. Yet within 2 decades, he would defeat Caesar's enemies, transform the Republic into an empire, and take the name Augustus. The assassins' dream of saving the Republic had failed. Instead, their daggers had cut the last thread holding it together. Looking back, the story of Caesar's assassination is not simply about the fall of one man. It is about the fragile balance between democracy and dictatorship, between myth and reality. Caesar was both a visionary and a tyrant, a man who expanded Rome's power but also concentrated it in himself. His death was not the end of Rome's troubles but the beginning of something far larger. The Republic died on the Ides of March, even as its defenders believed they were saving it. The murder of Julius Caesar was one of the most dramatic moments in history, but it was also deeply human, a tale of ambition, fear, betrayal, and the unpredictability of power. Behind the marble statues and schoolbook stories, we find not a flawless hero or a simple villain, but a complex man who dreamed of eternal glory and whose death echoed across centuries. The daggers of the Senate silenced Caesar, but they also unleashed an empire, ensuring that his name, Caesar, would live on, not just as a man, but as a title worn by emperors for 1,000 years. Cleopatra VII is one of the most enduring figures in history, remembered as the last pharaoh of Egypt and immortalized by countless plays, novels, and films. To many, she is the quintessential seductress, an exotic queen who lured powerful Roman men into her bed and lost everything through love. But when we peel away centuries of propaganda and storytelling, a very different picture emerges. Cleopatra was not simply a woman of beauty and charm, she was a master of survival in a world dominated by men, a brilliant strategist who fought desperately to protect her dynasty and her kingdom from the growing shadow of Rome. She was born into the turbulent world of the Ptolemies, a Greek dynasty that had ruled Egypt since the days of Alexander the Great. Her family was infamous for political infighting, murder, and betrayal. Brothers killed sisters, mothers killed sons, and nearly every heir had to fight for survival. From childhood, Cleopatra learned that power in Egypt was never guaranteed, it was seized and defended through cunning and often through blood. Unlike many of her predecessors, she was multilingual, speaking not only Greek but also Egyptian and other regional tongues. This ability made her unique, for the Ptolemies had long been outsiders ruling over an Egyptian population they scarcely understood. Cleopatra embraced Egypt's traditions, styling herself as the living goddess Isis and cultivating an image that fused Greek and Egyptian heritage. Her reign began in partnership with her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, but quickly descended into civil war. It was in this moment of crisis that Julius Caesar entered the picture. The legendary story tells of Cleopatra being smuggled into Caesar's presence rolled in a carpet, a dramatic gesture that has been repeated in countless retellings. While the detail may be embellished, the truth is that Cleopatra knew how to make a striking impression. Aligning with Caesar was not merely a romantic entanglement, it was a calculated move for survival. Rome had become the arbiter of power in the Mediterranean, and Cleopatra's future depended on winning its favor. With Caesar's backing, Cleopatra defeated her brother's forces and secured her throne. She bore Caesar a son, Caesar Ion, whom she hoped would secure her dynasty's future. But Caesar's assassination in 44 BCE shattered those plans, leaving her vulnerable once again. Rome descended into chaos, and Cleopatra found herself navigating the dangerous rivalries of Caesar's successors. It was then that she forged her most famous alliance, with Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal general and one of the 3 men who ruled Rome in the years after his death. Popular imagination has cast Antony and Cleopatra as tragic lovers, star-crossed figures undone by passion. Yet their relationship was also profoundly political. Cleopatra needed Rome's protection, Antony needed Egypt's immense wealth to fund his campaigns. Together, they were a formidable power couple. In Alexandria, Antony embraced Egyptian customs, presenting himself alongside Cleopatra as Dionysus and Isis, rulers not just of Egypt but of a broader, divine empire. This blending of politics and spectacle shocked and angered Rome, where opponents painted Cleopatra as a manipulative temptress leading Antony astray. Roman propaganda, especially that of Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir and Antony's rival, demonized her as a foreign witch corrupting a Roman statesman. In truth, Cleopatra was playing a high-stakes game. She hosted Antony in a court famed for its luxury and splendor, but also governed a kingdom that was under constant pressure. Everyday life in Alexandria was a mixture of opulence and anxiety. The city was the intellectual capital of the ancient world, home to the great library and buzzing with scholars, philosophers, and merchants from across the Mediterranean. But beneath the grandeur lay a society deeply tied to the Nile's yearly flooding, dependent on its rhythm for survival. Cleopatra was not merely a figure of romance, she was responsible for ensuring her people were fed, taxes were collected, and Egypt remained stable amidst famine and unrest. The final chapter of her life came with the clash between Antony and Octavian. The decisive Battle of Actium in 31 BCE sealed her fate. Antony and Cleopatra's fleet was crushed, and they retreated to Egypt, their hopes collapsing. Octavian advanced on Alexandria, determined to destroy them. The dramatic end has been told many times. Antony, believing Cleopatra dead, fell on his sword. Mortally wounded, he was brought to her, dying in her arms. Cleopatra, left with no allies and facing humiliation as a captive in Rome, resolved to end her life on her own terms. The traditional story is that she allowed a venomous asp to bite her, dying in regal defiance. But historians debate the truth. Some suggest she may have used a fast-acting poison, or that Octavian allowed the myth of the snake bite to spread because it was a dramatic ending befitting the exotic queen. What matters is that Cleopatra chose death over disgrace, ensuring that she would be remembered as a ruler who refused to be paraded as a trophy in Rome's triumph. Her legacy, however, was shaped by her enemies. Roman writers like Plutarch, Suetonius, and later dramatists such as Shakespeare turned her into a symbol of dangerous female sexuality, a woman whose allure brought down great men. Yet the evidence suggests she was far more than that. She was an administrator, a mother, a polyglot, and a ruler who managed to preserve Egypt's independence longer than anyone thought possible. Even her death was an act of control, denying Octavian complete victory. When we strip away the myths, Cleopatra emerges not as a mere seductress but as a survivor in an unforgiving age. Her beauty may have been praised, but it was her intellect, her political skill, and her resilience that truly defined her. In a dynasty where siblings poisoned one another and Rome's shadow loomed ever larger, Cleopatra carved out a place in history by sheer will. Her story is not one of romance alone but of a queen who fought against overwhelming odds and secured her immortality, not just in monuments and coins, but in the imagination of the world. Alexander the Great's name has become shorthand for conquest and glory. By the time of his death at only 32 years old, he had carved out an empire that stretched from Greece to Egypt, Persia to India. He is often portrayed as a visionary who spread Greek culture across the known world, a military genius whose tactics are still studied in academies today. But behind the statues, legends, and schoolbook summaries lies a far more complicated figure. Alexander was at once brilliant and reckless, inspiring and terrifying. To his men, he was a living god, to his enemies, a destroyer without mercy. And to historians, he remains a puzzle. Was he truly a genius destined for greatness, or a man consumed by delusions of divinity and paranoia that bordered on madness? Born in 356 BCE in Pella, Macedonia, Alexander was the son of King Philip II and Queen Olympias. His childhood was shaped by extraordinary influences. His father was a ruthless warrior who had united the fractious Greek city-states under Macedonian dominance. His mother, fiercely ambitious, told him he was descended from Achilles and Hercules, feeding a sense of divine destiny. As a boy, Alexander was tutored by Aristotle, the philosopher whose teachings gave him a deep appreciation for Greek culture, science, and philosophy. Yet even with this grounding, Alexander's life was marked from the start by intensity, restlessness, and a hunger for greatness. When Philip was assassinated, possibly with Olympias's involvement, Alexander seized the throne at the age of 20. He crushed revolts in Greece with brutal efficiency, raising the city of Thebes as a warning to others. Then he turned his eyes east, toward Persia, the greatest empire of the age. The Persian Empire was vast, rich, and seemingly invincible. Yet Alexander, with a relatively small but fiercely disciplined army, dared to challenge it. His campaigns over the next decade became legendary. At battles such as Issus and Gaugamela, he outmaneuvered armies many times the size of his own, using bold tactics and personal leadership that inspired his men. He fought in the thick of battle, wounded many times, but always at the front, sharing the risks of his soldiers. But these victories came at immense cost. Cities that resisted were often annihilated. At Tyre, Alexander besieged the city for 7 brutal months before ordering a massacre of its inhabitants and selling thousands into slavery. At Gaza, he was wounded but returned to slaughter its defenders. His march into Persia was not simply a heroic advance, it was also a trail of blood and destruction. Yet to his soldiers, he was more than a king. He was a figure of myth, someone whose charisma and daring made the impossible seem inevitable. As he conquered, Alexander began to believe he was more than human. He visited the oracle of Ammon in Egypt, where priests hailed him as the son of Zeus. He embraced divine titles, demanded recognition not just as a king but as a living god. For the Greeks, this was troubling, no mortal should claim such honors. But for Alexander, it was part of his vision. He sought to blend Greek and Eastern traditions, presenting himself as a universal ruler who transcended cultures. He married Roxana, a Bactrian princess, and encouraged his officers to take local wives. He wore Persian dress, adopted Persian court rituals, and attempted to fuse his Macedonian army with foreign troops. This vision, however, sowed resentment. His Macedonian soldiers, proud of their traditions, resented what they saw as their king going native. Mutinies broke out, most famously at the Hyphasis River in India, where his exhausted army refused to march farther east. Alexander had dreamed of reaching the end of the world, of conquering lands beyond India, but his men could endure no more. Bitterly, he turned back, sulking but accepting the limits of human endurance. Along the way, Alexander's darker traits became increasingly visible. Heavy drinking was common at his court, and during drunken feasts, his temper could become deadly. At one banquet, in a fit of rage, he killed his close friend and general Clitus the Black, the very man who had saved his life at the Battle of Granicus. The act horrified his companions and left Alexander racked with remorse, but it also revealed how unstable he had become. His paranoia grew as well. He executed trusted officers on suspicion of treason, sometimes with little evidence. Those who challenged him paid with their lives. The question of his sexuality, often romanticized in modern retellings, also reveals his complexity. Ancient sources suggest deep relationships with men, particularly his lifelong companion Hephaestion, whom some describe as his lover. When Hephaestion died suddenly, Alexander was inconsolable. He ordered extravagant mourning rituals, cutting his hair in grief like Achilles for Patroclus. His grief was so intense that he executed a physician he blamed for the death and demanded divine honors for Hephaestion, blurring the line between love and political spectacle. Alexander's final campaign, in Babylon, was marked by ominous signs. He threw himself into new plans, conquering Arabia, circumnavigating Africa, even marching west into Europe. But his health began to fail. In 323 BCE, after days of heavy drinking, he fell ill with fever. Some believed it was poison, administered by disgruntled officers. Others suggest malaria, typhoid, or an autoimmune disease. His condition worsened rapidly, and within 2 weeks, he was near death. Unable to speak, he reportedly passed his signet ring to his generals when asked who would succeed him. His answer, according to some sources, was chilling: to the strongest. Alexander's death at 32 was as sudden as it was mysterious. Without a clear heir, his empire fractured almost immediately. His generals, known as the Diadochi, carved up the lands he had conquered, plunging them into decades of war. The dream of a single empire uniting East and West died with him. Yet his legacy endured. Greek culture spread throughout the Middle East, blending with local traditions in what became known as the Hellenistic Age. Cities he founded, such as Alexandria in Egypt, became centers of learning and trade for centuries. But was Alexander truly great? His achievements were monumental, yet his campaigns left behind countless dead, destroyed cities, and a legacy of instability. His charisma was undeniable, yet his paranoia and violent rages revealed deep flaws. To some, he was a visionary who sought to unite the world; to others, a megalomaniac obsessed with conquest and glory at any cost. The truth lies somewhere in between: a man of extraordinary talent, driven by ambition, haunted by insecurity, and convinced he was destined for divinity. Even in death, Alexander's body was treated like that of a god. His remains were taken to Egypt, where he was entombed in a magnificent sarcophagus in Alexandria. Pilgrims, including later rulers like Julius Caesar and Augustus, visited his tomb to pay homage. But the tomb itself was eventually lost to time, and with it, the last physical trace of the man who once ruled the known world. Perhaps that is fitting. Alexander's life was a blaze of glory, too intense to last, leaving behind not a stable empire but a legend that has endured for over 2 millennia. Charlemagne, or Charles the Great, is often celebrated as the father of Europe, a towering figure credited with uniting much of Western Europe after the fall of the Roman Empire. In history books, he is portrayed as a wise and pious ruler who laid the foundations for modern Europe. Yet beneath this heroic image lies a man whose reign was often brutal, chaotic, and far more human than the legends suggest. Charlemagne's story is one of contrasts: a patron of learning who may have been illiterate, a unifier of nations who ruled through terror, and a Christian king who forced entire peoples to convert under threat of death. To truly understand him, we must step beyond the stained glass image and into the messy reality of early medieval power. Born in 742 CE, Charlemagne inherited the Frankish throne from his father, Pepin the Short, at a time when Europe was fractured into warring kingdoms and tribal territories. From a young age, he was trained to rule with an iron fist. He was educated in the rudiments of Latin, religion, and governance, though sources suggest he may never have mastered writing. Instead, he relied on memorization, advisors, and a keen strategic mind. His genius lay not in scholarship but in action, battlefield strategy, political alliances, and an uncanny ability to inspire loyalty, or fear, among those around him. Charlemagne's military campaigns were central to his rise. He waged relentless wars against the Saxons, a pagan people living along the northeastern borders of his kingdom. The Saxon Wars lasted more than 30 years and were marked by extreme brutality. Charlemagne enacted the Capitularies, laws demanding conversion to Christianity under threat of death. Entire villages were destroyed, and mass executions were common. One particularly infamous episode, the massacre of Verdun in 782, saw Charlemagne order the killing of 4,500 Saxon prisoners who refused baptism. This was not mere cruelty, it was a calculated method of consolidating power and imposing unity. Yet it also reveals a darker side of his character, a ruler willing to commit mass murder to achieve his vision of a Christian empire. Despite the violence, Charlemagne's court was a center of culture and learning. He initiated the Carolingian Renaissance, encouraging scholars, monks, and clerics to preserve classical texts and improve literacy among his administrators. He invited Alcuin of York, one of the era's most renowned intellectuals, to oversee education and reform the script, standardizing Latin for administration and record-keeping. Charlemagne himself struggled with reading and writing, but he recognized the value of knowledge as a tool of governance. His court became a beacon of learning in a Europe still emerging from the Dark Ages, combining scholarship with sword-wielding authority. Charlemagne's personal life was equally complex. He was married multiple times, often for political alliances, and fathered more than 18 children. He maintained strict discipline within his family and court, sometimes to ruthless effect. Disobedient nobles were imprisoned, exiled, or executed. He was known to travel extensively, visiting distant provinces to ensure loyalty, hearing grievances, and enforcing law with a mix of charisma and intimidation. Accounts describe him as physically imposing, with piercing eyes and a commanding presence that could dominate a room. Yet he could also be charming, generous, and deeply religious, attending church daily and fasting on a strict schedule. The crowning moment of Charlemagne's life came on Christmas Day in the year 800, when Pope Leo III placed a crown upon his head in St. Peter's Basilica, proclaiming him Emperor of the Romans. This event symbolized the fusion of Roman legacy, Christian authority, and Frankish power. Charlemagne himself may have been surprised by the coronation, perhaps not expecting the papacy to assert such influence over imperial legitimacy. Nevertheless, he accepted it, aware that the title strengthened his authority and cemented his place in history. The act marked the beginning of the Holy Roman Empire, a political entity that would shape European politics for centuries. Yet even in triumph, Charlemagne's reign was fraught with tension. His empire was vast but difficult to govern, stretching across diverse peoples, languages, and traditions. Rebellion was a constant threat, both from conquered populations and ambitious family members. He imposed strict legal codes, sometimes harshly punishing minor infractions, and relied on a network of counts and administrators to enforce his will. His legacy of order came at the cost of fear, showing that his greatness was inseparable from the harsh realities of ruling in a violent, uncertain world. Charlemagne's death in 814 brought an end to a remarkable era, but it also exposed the fragility of his empire. His heirs struggled to maintain cohesion, and within decades, the empire fragmented into smaller kingdoms. Yet the myth of Charlemagne endured. Medieval chroniclers and later historians celebrated him as the embodiment of Christian kingship, a ruler who bridged the gap between the classical world and the medieval age. Statues, coins, and manuscripts presented a sanitized version of his life, emphasizing piety, wisdom, and justice while downplaying the mass killings, forced conversions, and ruthless suppression of dissent that marked his reign. To understand Charlemagne fully, we must embrace the paradoxes. He was illiterate yet a patron of learning, brutal yet visionary, a conqueror who promoted culture, a king whose power relied on fear as much as loyalty. His story reminds us that history rarely presents heroes in pure light. Great rulers are often shaped by violence, necessity, and circumstance as much as by skill and vision. Charlemagne's legacy is both inspiring and unsettling, a testament to the human capacity for achievement and the moral compromises demanded by power. In the end, Charlemagne was more than the legends suggest, but also far less idealized than history often remembers. He shaped Europe in ways that endure to this day, yet he did so through methods that were harsh, calculated, and at times ruthless. His reign teaches us that the line between hero and tyrant, between greatness and cruelty, is often thinner than we imagine. The emperor who could not write his name nonetheless etched his presence into the course of history, leaving a world forever changed by both his vision and his violence. Genghis Khan, born Temujin in the windswept steppes of Mongolia around 1162, is remembered as one of history's most fearsome conquerors. His name conjures images of vast armies sweeping across Asia, leaving destruction and terror in their wake. Popular imagination often paints him as a savage barbarian, a destroyer of civilizations. Yet this view is incomplete. Beneath the tales of mass slaughter lies a man of extraordinary intelligence, discipline, and vision, an innovator who reshaped the political and social landscape of the Eurasian continent. To understand Genghis Khan is to explore the delicate balance between genius and brutality, order and chaos, myth and reality. Temujin was born into a fractured world. His father, a minor tribal leader, was poisoned when Temujin was still a boy, leaving the family destitute. He and his mother were abandoned by their clan, forced to survive in a harsh, unforgiving environment where wolves prowled the steppe and starvation was a constant threat. From these early hardships, Temujin learned resilience, cunning, and the brutal logic of survival. Loyalty and betrayal were central to his early life. Allies could turn enemies, and enemies could become indispensable allies. These lessons would later shape the political and military strategies that defined his conquests. As he rose to power, Temujin unified the disparate Mongol tribes through a combination of diplomacy, strategic marriages, and fear. He was a master of building alliances while ruthlessly eliminating rivals. Unlike many leaders of the time, he promoted men based on merit rather than noble birth. A skilled horseman and tactician, he reorganized his warriors into highly disciplined units called tumans, each consisting of 10,000 soldiers, subdivided into smaller groups. This structure allowed the Mongols to move with unmatched speed and coordination, a key factor in their unprecedented military success. Genghis Khan's campaigns were marked by both innovation and terror. He employed intelligence networks, psychological warfare, and siege technologies learned from captured enemies. Cities that resisted were often subjected to extreme violence. Entire populations were massacred, and survivors were sometimes enslaved or displaced. These acts of brutality were not random, they were deliberate strategies to instill fear and compel future surrender without prolonged conflict. Historians estimate that millions died during his campaigns, making him one of history's deadliest conquerors. Yet at the same time, he was a pragmatic ruler who understood that cooperation and governance were necessary to maintain control over vast territories. Despite his fearsome reputation, Genghis Khan's rule was surprisingly progressive in some areas. He established a legal code known as the Yasa, which regulated everything from military discipline to civil conduct, emphasizing loyalty, justice, and religious tolerance. Unlike many rulers of the era, he allowed conquered peoples to maintain their customs and beliefs, provided they pledged allegiance and paid tribute. Trade and communication flourished under his reign, and he promoted the exchange of goods, knowledge, and ideas across Eurasia. The Silk Road, revitalized under Mongol control, became a conduit for cultural and economic interaction that would shape the world for centuries. Genghis Khan was also deeply concerned with family and succession. He arranged marriages strategically, both to cement alliances and to ensure the loyalty of his generals. His children were entrusted with governance over various regions, and he carefully trained them to continue his legacy. Yet even in his personal life, he was not free from the harshness that defined his rule. Punishments for disobedience could be severe, and he demanded absolute loyalty from those around him. His own life was a constant negotiation between affection, pragmatism, and the uncompromising demands of leadership. The final years of Genghis Khan's life were marked by continued expansion and consolidation. By the time of his death in 1227, he had created an empire stretching from the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea, one of the largest contiguous empires in history. His burial, however, remains shrouded in mystery. According to legend, the funeral escort killed anyone who crossed their path to keep the location secret, and the exact site of his grave has never been found. This secrecy only adds to the mystique of his persona, blending fact and legend into a narrative that has fascinated historians for centuries. Genghis Khan's legacy is one of contrasts. He was a ruthless conqueror whose campaigns reshaped nations and destroyed countless lives. Yet he was also an extraordinary statesman, a codifier of laws, a promoter of trade and cultural exchange, and a unifier of previously warring tribes. His genius lay in his ability to combine fear with vision, brutality with order, and conquest with governance. He understood human nature, both the ambitions and the fears of those around him, and used this insight to forge one of the most enduring empires in history. Even centuries later, Genghis Khan remains a figure of fascination, feared and admired in equal measure. In Mongolia, he is revered as a national hero, a symbol of strength and unity. Elsewhere, he is remembered as a scourge of civilization. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between. Genghis Khan was neither wholly monster nor wholly visionary. He was a man shaped by the harsh world of the steppe, who turned the forces of nature, culture, and ambition to his advantage. His shadow stretches across history, a reminder that the line between genius and terror is often measured in the lives of millions. In the end, Genghis Khan's story is not only about conquest but about the transformation of human society. He demonstrated that even in the most unforgiving landscapes, one person's vision, ruthlessness, and intelligence could create an empire that would endure long after their death. To study him is to confront the uncomfortable truth that greatness often comes at an extraordinary cost, and that the world we know today was, in part, shaped by the shadow of the Mongol steppe. Henry VIII is one of England's most infamous monarchs, instantly recognizable for his 6 marriages and the dramatic upheaval he brought to the English Church. Popular culture often reduces him to a caricature, the obese, tyrannical king obsessed with producing a male heir. Yet behind the sensational stories lies a far more complex figure, a man whose personal desires, political ambitions, and insecurities shaped a nation and left a legacy that still resonates today. To understand Henry VIII is to explore the intimate entanglement of love, power, religion, and fear in Tudor England. Born in 1491 to Henry VII and Elizabeth of York, Henry was the second son and not expected to inherit the throne. His older brother, Arthur, was groomed for kingship, and Henry grew up with a sense of competition and an early drive to prove himself. Trained in languages, music, hunting, and combat, he was athletic, charming, and intelligent. By the time he became king in 1509, following Arthur's death, Henry was a handsome, energetic young man with a keen interest in glory, reputation, and legacy. Henry's reign began with promise and popularity. He married Catherine of Aragon, Arthur's widow, and was initially celebrated for his charisma, leadership, and patronage of the arts. But the king's ambitions and personal desires soon collided with the harsh realities of dynastic politics. Catherine, though a devoted wife, had produced only one surviving child, Mary, and Henry became obsessed with the prospect of a male heir to secure the Tudor dynasty. His solution, in his mind, was to seek a marriage that could provide a son, leading him to push the boundaries of church authority and tradition. This obsession set in motion one of the most seismic shifts in English history, the break with the Roman Catholic Church. Henry requested an annulment from Pope Clement VII, arguing that his marriage to Catherine was invalid because she had been his brother's wife. When the Pope refused, Henry took matters into his own hands, establishing the Church of England with the king as its supreme head. This move allowed him to divorce Catherine and marry Anne Boleyn, a union that promised the male heir he so desperately wanted. The political and religious ramifications were enormous. Monasteries were dissolved, land seized, and England's relationship with Europe permanently altered. Yet the human cost of Henry's reign was immense. His relentless pursuit of heirs and obsession with loyalty bred fear and executions. Anne Boleyn, once the object of his desire, was executed for alleged adultery and treason after producing only a daughter, Elizabeth. Jane Seymour, his third wife, bore the much-desired son, Edward, but died shortly after childbirth. Other wives were divorced, imprisoned, or executed, often on flimsy evidence. Nobles and advisers who fell out of favor faced harsh punishments, including imprisonment in the Tower of London, torture, and execution. Fear was a constant tool in Henry's arsenal, used to maintain authority and suppress dissent. Henry's personal life mirrored the volatility of his political decisions. He was a man of extremes, devout in religion one moment, tyrannical the next, indulgent in feasting, hunting, and entertainment, yet quick to rage and vengeance. His physical transformation over the years, marked by obesity, leg ulcers, and declining health, only amplified his paranoia and volatility. Chronic pain and limited mobility may have intensified his temper, making the court an environment of both awe and terror. Courtiers navigated a delicate balance, trying to gain favor while avoiding the king's deadly suspicion. Beyond his marriages and tyranny, Henry VIII was a remarkable administrator and patron of culture. He reorganized the royal finances, strengthened the navy, and expanded England's influence abroad. He was deeply interested in humanist learning, theology, and the arts, commissioning magnificent palaces, lavish clothing, and portraits that projected his power and image. Yet even these accomplishments were intertwined with control and self-interest. Culture became another tool to reinforce the king's authority and legacy. The consequences of Henry's reign extended far beyond his lifetime. By breaking with Rome, he set the stage for the English Reformation, fundamentally altering the religious, political, and cultural landscape of England. His children, Edward VI, Mary I, and Elizabeth I, each inherited a kingdom shaped by his decisions, and his dynastic obsessions continued to influence politics for generations. Yet the shadow of his tyranny and fear remained, reminding the nation that monarchy could be both protective and deadly, nurturing and cruel. Henry VIII's story is one of human contradiction, brilliant and destructive, charismatic and cruel, visionary and insecure. His pursuit of love, heirs, and legacy drove monumental changes in English history, but it also left a trail of fear, death, and unrest. Popular images of Henry often simplify him as the gluttonous tyrant, yet the reality is far more nuanced. He was a ruler whose personal passions and political ambitions were inseparable, whose human flaws and desires had consequences that shaped a nation. In the end, Henry VIII teaches us about the volatile intersection of personal desire and public power. A king who sought love, control, and immortality through his children reshaped religion, politics, and society. His life and reign remind us that behind the myths of royalty lies the human reality, ambition, fear, desire, and the sometimes tragic consequences of both. Henry VIII's name endures not just for his marriages or excesses, but for the indelible mark he left on English history, a testament to the power, and peril, of a monarch who ruled with both passion and ruthlessness. Ivan IV of Russia, better known as Ivan the Terrible, remains one of history's most infamous rulers, a man whose reign combined brilliance, vision, and unrelenting cruelty. His name evokes terror, and for good reason. Yet to reduce Ivan to a mere tyrant is to overlook the complexities that defined him, a ruler forged by childhood trauma, obsessed with power, and driven by paranoia that would shape the future of Russia for centuries. His life is a window into the dark realities of monarchy, where fear, violence, and genius often intertwined. Born in 1530, Ivan's early life was anything but secure. His father, Grand Prince Vasily III, died when Ivan was just 3, leaving him heir to the throne. His mother, Elena Glinskaya, ruled as regent but died under mysterious circumstances when he was only 8, plunging Ivan into a world of court intrigue, abuse, and neglect. Orphaned and exposed to constant danger from powerful boyars, Russia's noble class, he witnessed betrayal, imprisonment, and assassination plots firsthand. These formative experiences instilled in him deep mistrust, paranoia, and a sense that survival required absolute control over those around him. Ivan ascended to the throne officially in 1547, adopting the title of Tsar of all Russia, a word derived from Caesar, signaling a claim to imperial authority. His reign began with promise. He implemented reforms to centralize power, codified laws, improved trade, and restructured the military. He was an ambitious ruler who sought to expand Russian territory, strengthen the state, and assert dominance over neighboring lands. These efforts demonstrated intelligence, vision, and the capability to transform a fragmented country into a centralized empire. Yet the promise of Ivan's early rule was overshadowed by the dark side of his personality. His paranoia, shaped by childhood trauma, grew into a defining feature of his reign. Ivan increasingly distrusted the boyars and even members of his own family. To enforce his authority, he created the Oprichnina, a personal police force that wielded terrifying power. Clad in black robes and riding black horses, the Oprichniki carried out public executions, confiscated land, and instilled fear across the country. Their actions were designed to crush resistance, eliminate rivals, and ensure absolute loyalty to the Tsar. Towns that resisted were often massacred, their populations decimated as warnings to others. Ivan's reign was also marked by deeply personal acts of violence, often driven by rage or suspicion. In 1581, in a moment of fury, he killed his own son and heir, Ivan Ivanovich, during an argument. The act was catastrophic, leaving the succession uncertain and destabilizing the royal line. Chroniclers recount that Ivan was immediately remorseful, weeping over the body of his son, yet the damage had been done. This moment encapsulates the complexity of his character, a ruler capable of profound affection and devastating cruelty, a man whose intelligence and ambition were inseparable from his unpredictable temper. Religion played a central role in Ivan's rule, though it was intertwined with fear and spectacle. He was deeply pious, attending church regularly and invoking divine authority to justify his actions. At the same time, he used religious imagery and rituals to legitimize his absolute power, portraying himself as God's chosen instrument on earth. This blending of faith and tyranny reinforced his control and contributed to the aura of inevitability surrounding his rule. Despite the terror he inspired, Ivan was a skilled administrator and strategist. He expanded Russian territory through both diplomacy and warfare, annexing Kazan, Astrakhan, and other key regions along the Volga River. These campaigns brought wealth, resources, and strategic advantage, consolidating Russia's position as a growing power in Eastern Europe. Ivan's ability to combine military acumen with ruthless governance ensured that his vision of a centralized Russian state endured, even amidst the chaos of his reign. Ivan's personal life reflected the intensity and volatility of his rule. He married multiple times, often for political reasons, and had numerous children, though many of his marriages were short-lived or tragic. His relationships were shaped by power, suspicion, and obsession, leaving a legacy of familial tension and tragedy. Even as he expanded the Russian state, he remained haunted by insecurity, unable to fully trust those closest to him. By the end of his reign in 1584, Ivan had transformed Russia in ways that would endure for generations. He centralized power, expanded territory, and imposed a vision of authority that combined fear, respect, and obedience. Yet his methods left deep scars, thousands of lives lost, families shattered, and a culture of terror that would influence Russian governance for decades. His name, the Terrible, captures only a fraction of his impact. He was also visionary, strategic, and determined to shape his country according to his own conception of order and destiny. Ivan the Terrible's story is a stark reminder of the human cost of power. He was not merely a tyrant, he was a man shaped by trauma, circumstance, and ambition, whose genius was inseparable from his cruelty. His life forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about leadership, loyalty, and the dark side of authority. Behind the legend of fear lies the story of a ruler who transformed Russia forever, leaving a legacy that is as fascinating as it is terrifying. In the end, Ivan's reign teaches that the line between madness and brilliance is often razor-thin, and that the consolidation of power frequently demands acts of violence that are remembered long after the ruler's death. He was a czar, a visionary, a father, a murderer, and a survivor, a man whose life embodies the volatile and often tragic intersection of humanity and absolute authority. Napoleon Bonaparte is one of history's most celebrated and controversial figures, a man whose ambition reshaped Europe and whose legend continues to capture imaginations worldwide. To some, he is the brilliant military strategist, the visionary reformer, the emperor who spread the principles of the French Revolution across the continent. To others, he is the tyrant, the warmonger, and the usurper whose obsession with power brought untold suffering. Napoleon's story is one of extraordinary brilliance, relentless ambition, and human vulnerability, a cautionary tale of how one individual can alter the course of history, and be undone by the very forces he commands. Napoleon was born in 1769 on the small Mediterranean island of Corsica, just months after France had annexed it. The son of minor nobility, he grew up in a world shaped by political turbulence, colonial ambition, and shifting loyalties. His family was neither wealthy nor powerful, yet they valued education and instilled in him a fierce determination to rise above his circumstances. Napoleon's early life was marked by discipline, rivalry, and a sense of destiny, as he excelled in school and displayed an early aptitude for mathematics, history, and military strategy. From a young age, he understood that intelligence, cunning, and decisiveness could allow him to transcend the limits of his birth. As a young officer during the French Revolution, Napoleon quickly distinguished himself through daring, audacity, and an uncanny ability to read both the battlefield and the political landscape. France was convulsed by upheaval, and the revolution offered opportunities for talented men to rise rapidly. Napoleon seized these opportunities, using military brilliance and propaganda to enhance his reputation. Victories in Italy and Egypt elevated him from relative obscurity to national fame, demonstrating not only his skill as a commander but also his ability to manipulate public perception. He understood that a hero on the battlefield could become a symbol for a nation in search of stability and glory. Napoleon's ambition soon transcended the battlefield. In 1799, he orchestrated a coup d'état, overthrowing the French Directory and establishing the consulate, positioning himself as first consul. By 1804, he crowned himself Emperor of the French, signaling his belief that ultimate authority rested not in the church or in any other institution, but in his own hands. His reforms were sweeping. He reorganized the administrative structure of France, codified laws in the Napoleonic Code, reformed the tax system, and promoted education. These measures modernized the state and created a legacy of legal and bureaucratic order that survives to this day. Yet Napoleon's genius for governance was inseparable from his hunger for personal power. Napoleon's military campaigns are legendary for their ambition and ingenuity. He introduced revolutionary tactics, rapid troop movements, and flexible strategies that allowed him to defeat larger, better-equipped armies. Battles such as Austerlitz, Jena, and Wagram showcased his ability to anticipate enemy movements and exploit weaknesses with precision. His victories reshaped the map of Europe, dissolving old kingdoms, creating client states, and spreading French influence from Spain to Poland. Yet these campaigns were also devastating. Cities were destroyed, thousands of soldiers and civilians died, and the constant warring drained resources and morale. Napoleon's brilliance was inseparable from the human cost of his ambition. Despite his successes, Napoleon was also deeply flawed. His obsession with control and glory often led to hubris and strategic miscalculations. The invasion of Russia in 1812 remains a cautionary tale, overextending his forces, underestimating logistical challenges, and ignoring the harsh Russian winter. Napoleon's Grande Armée suffered catastrophic losses. From an initial force of over 600,000, fewer than 100,000 returned. This disaster marked the beginning of his decline, revealing the limits of genius when confronted with nature, distance, and the resilience of adversaries. Napoleon's personal life was equally turbulent. His marriage to Josephine de Beauharnais was passionate but fraught with infidelity, political calculation, and emotional complexity. After she failed to produce an heir, he divorced her and married Marie-Louise of Austria, securing dynastic legitimacy for his empire. Yet even as he wielded immense power, Napoleon faced isolation, paranoia, and the weight of expectation. Friends became rivals, generals plotted, and Europe's coalitions united against him, forcing him into a constant struggle to maintain supremacy. By 1814, Napoleon's fortunes had reversed. Allied forces invaded France, capturing Paris and forcing his abdication. He was exiled to the remote island of Elba, yet even in exile, he plotted his return. The famous Hundred Days campaign saw him briefly reclaim power, thrilling the French people and terrifying Europe's monarchies. But the decisive defeat at Waterloo in 1815 ended his ambitions permanently. Captured by the British, he was sent to the isolated island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic, where he lived out his final years under strict supervision, reflecting on his life, empire, and failures. Napoleon's death in 1821, at the age of 51, marked the end of a life of extraordinary highs and catastrophic lows. He left behind a Europe reshaped politically, legally, and militarily. His Napoleonic code influenced countless legal systems, his campaigns inspired military theory, and his life became the subject of myth, legend, and debate. Yet his story is also a reminder of the fragility of power. A man who once commanded Europe's largest armies could be reduced to exile by the forces of circumstance and human resistance. Napoleon's legacy is a study in contrasts. He was a visionary, a reformer, and a military genius, yet also a warmonger, a dictator, and a man whose ambition often blinded him to reality. He understood the importance of symbolism, propaganda, and perception, building an image as both emperor and hero, while often ignoring the toll his actions took on others. His life illustrates the intersection of extraordinary talent and profound human flaw, and how the desire for glory can both elevate and destroy. In the end, Napoleon Bonaparte is remembered not only for his conquests or his reforms but for the dramatic arc of his life, a meteoric rise, unparalleled power, devastating defeats, and exile. His story embodies the possibilities and perils of ambition, the human capacity for genius and folly, and the enduring impact one individual can have on the course of history. From the battlefields of Europe to the lonely cliffs of St. Helena, Napoleon's journey remains a testament to both the heights and limits of human ambition. Queen Victoria, who reigned over the United Kingdom from 1837 to 1901, is often remembered as the emblem of an era defined by stability, morality, and progress. The Victorian age brought industrial innovation, scientific discovery, and cultural refinement, but beneath the surface lay a complex web of social tension, colonial exploitation, and personal isolation. Victoria's reign exemplifies the contradictions of power. She was a symbol of national pride and empire, yet also a woman bound by duty, constrained by personal grief, and deeply aware of the human costs of imperial ambition. Born in 1819, Victoria was the daughter of Prince Edward, Duke of Kent, and Princess Victoria of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld. Her early life was tightly controlled under the Kensington system, a rigid regimen designed by her mother and her advisor Sir John Conroy to make her compliant and dependent. Sheltered, isolated, and closely supervised, Victoria grew up in an environment that instilled a strong sense of duty and resilience. By the age of 18, she ascended the throne, inheriting a kingdom already undergoing immense change due to industrialization, urbanization, and political reform. Victoria's early reign was marked by political turbulence. Britain faced social unrest, calls for reform, and the challenge of balancing a constitutional monarchy with the authority of Parliament. Victoria quickly understood the symbolic power of the crown, cultivating an image of dignity, moral fortitude, and stability. Yet she also clashed with her ministers, most famously with Lord Melbourne, her early Prime Minister, whose guidance both shaped her political understanding and revealed the limitations imposed on a young monarch. Her assertiveness in private and public life helped define the role of a modern queen, blending ceremonial leadership with personal influence. Victoria's personal life was deeply intertwined with her reign. Her marriage to Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha was a partnership of intellect, ambition, and shared vision. Albert became not only her husband but her advisor, confidant, and driving force behind many of her initiatives. Together, they championed education, arts, and scientific advancement, transforming Buckingham Palace into a center of cultural and intellectual activity. However, their personal devotion also led to profound grief after Albert's death in 1861. Victoria withdrew from public life for years, mourning deeply and wearing black as a symbol of her loss, even as the empire demanded her presence and attention. Under Victoria, the British Empire expanded to unprecedented reach. Colonies in Africa, Asia, and the Pacific were brought under tighter control, and imperial trade and influence flourished. Yet this expansion came with immense human cost. Indigenous populations were often subjugated, displaced, or exploited to fuel imperial ambitions. Famines, forced labor, and cultural disruption accompanied the empire's growth, revealing the shadow behind the era's celebrated progress. Victoria herself was often removed from the realities of colonial governance, yet she symbolized the authority that sanctioned these actions, embodying the tension between national pride and moral responsibility. Victoria was also a monarch deeply concerned with image and symbolism. Portraits, public appearances, and the ceremonial aspects of monarchy reinforced her authority and shaped public perception. She understood that the crown was more than political power, it was a narrative, a way to unite diverse populations under a shared identity. Her influence extended to fashion, etiquette, and cultural norms, leaving a lasting imprint on British society. Yet the emphasis on propriety and moral authority often masked the contradictions of the age, including poverty, labor unrest, and social inequality. Despite the grandeur of the empire and the stability of her reign, Victoria's personal life reflected isolation and the pressures of responsibility. She bore 9 children, whose marriages helped secure alliances across Europe, but family dynamics were complex and sometimes strained. Her role as mother, wife, and monarch often collided, forcing her to navigate competing demands with diplomacy, discipline, and occasional rigidity. Her diaries and letters reveal a woman of keen intellect, humor, and emotional depth, struggling to reconcile private desires with public duty. Victoria's legacy is a study in contrasts. She presided over an era of tremendous growth, technological innovation, and imperial expansion, yet her reign also witnessed social inequities, colonial violence, and personal grief. She symbolized moral authority and national pride, yet she was also a figure shaped by confinement, loss, and the limitations of her office. Her influence extended far beyond the palace walls, affecting international diplomacy, cultural norms, and the trajectory of the British Empire. Ultimately, Queen Victoria's life and reign illustrate the complexities of monarchy in a rapidly changing world. She was both a symbol and a decision-maker, a woman of strength and vulnerability, a monarch whose presence unified yet whose authority could not fully shield her from the tragedies and contradictions of her age. The Victorian era, with its glittering achievements and hidden shadows, remains inseparable from her persona. Her story reminds us that power, no matter how revered, carries responsibilities, moral dilemmas, and personal costs that shape not only the ruler but the history they leave behind. Victoria's reign closed at the dawn of the 20th century, leaving a legacy of empire, cultural influence, and symbolic authority. Yet her life also challenges us to consider the human side of historical power, the grief, the isolation, the difficult choices, and the shadows cast by greatness. Queen Victoria stands as a testament to the intricate interplay between personal resolve, political ambition, and the burdens of history, a ruler whose impact endures long after the last page of her reign. Winston Churchill, one of the most iconic figures of the 20th century, is remembered as the indomitable leader who guided Britain through the perilous years of World War II. His name evokes courage, resilience, and eloquence, but the full story of Churchill is far more complex. He was not only a wartime hero but also a man of contradictions, visionary yet flawed, brilliant yet stubborn, charismatic yet polarizing. To understand Churchill is to explore the pressures of leadership under existential threat, the interplay of personality and history, and the thin line between genius and obstinacy in the life of a world-shaping statesman. Born in 1874 into the aristocratic family of Lord Randolph Churchill and Jennie Jerome, a wealthy American heiress, Winston was immersed from childhood in privilege, expectation, and political legacy. His upbringing was marked by emotional distance and rigorous schooling, creating a young man fiercely independent, proud, and determined to assert his identity. Despite academic struggles, Churchill excelled in military training, writing, and oratory, skills that would define his career. Ambition coursed through him from an early age, and he quickly learned to navigate the treacherous world of politics, media, and public perception. Churchill's early political life was a study in perseverance and controversy. He switched parties twice, earning criticism and suspicion from colleagues, yet his restless energy and intellectual curiosity set him apart. He held a variety of positions, from army officer to journalist to minister, demonstrating both a broad understanding of global affairs and an unrelenting drive to influence them. Even in these formative years, he displayed the qualities that would later define his leadership: strategic thinking, boldness, and a flair for dramatic, memorable expression. When World War II erupted in 1939, Churchill was initially a marginal political figure, often overlooked by peers. Yet as the crisis deepened, his warnings about the rise of Nazi Germany proved prescient, propelling him to the forefront of British politics. In 1940, with France falling and Britain standing alone against Hitler's forces, Churchill became Prime Minister. His ascendancy was as much a testament to his timing and insight as to his personal charisma. He inherited a nation gripped by fear, uncertainty, and the looming threat of invasion, a country teetering on the edge of despair. Churchill's wartime leadership combined inspiration with ruthless pragmatism. He understood that morale was as critical as strategy, delivering speeches that rallied a nation with phrases now etched into history: "We shall fight on the beaches, we shall never surrender." Yet behind the stirring rhetoric lay an unyielding determination to make hard choices, from resource allocation to military planning, often accepting high human costs to achieve long-term objectives. His leadership style was intensely personal. He visited bombed cities, inspected troops at the front, and used his presence to galvanize both public and military confidence. Despite his brilliance, Churchill was far from infallible. He made controversial decisions, some of which resulted in significant human suffering. The bombing campaigns against German cities, the handling of colonial crises, and military blunders such as the Gallipoli campaign during World War I illustrate the limits of his foresight and the weight of responsibility he carried. Yet even his failures reflected a willingness to take bold risks, to act decisively when history demanded it, a trait that often distinguished him from more cautious contemporaries. Churchill's personal life mirrored the intensity of his public role. Married to Clementine Hozier, he balanced a demanding political career with a family life that included 5 children. He was known for his voracious reading, painting, and writing, activities that provided both intellectual stimulation and emotional respite. His prolific output of books and speeches further cemented his status as a chronicler of history, shaping both contemporary understanding and the narrative of his own legacy. Churchill's leadership extended beyond military strategy to diplomacy and alliance building. He cultivated a close relationship with U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, recognizing the vital role of American support in sustaining the Allied war effort. His ability to navigate international politics, negotiate, and inspire cooperation was critical in maintaining the coalition that ultimately defeated Nazi Germany. Yet these successes also demanded compromise, patience, and the delicate balancing of personalities and national interests, a testament to his multifaceted political acumen. The end of World War II did not mark the end of Churchill's political career. Though voted out of office in 1945, he returned as Prime Minister in 1951, continuing to influence British and global politics during the early years of the Cold War. He became a symbol of continuity, resilience, and the enduring power of leadership shaped by experience and vision. His later years were devoted to writing, reflection, and public speaking, ensuring that his insights and historical perspective reached both contemporaries and future generations. Churchill's legacy is a study in contrasts. He was a man of immense courage and intelligence, yet also stubborn and occasionally insensitive, a visionary leader whose decisions saved nations, yet a figure whose actions sometimes caused suffering. His genius lay not only in strategic foresight but also in his ability to inspire, to communicate, and to endure under pressure. Churchill demonstrated that leadership in moments of existential crisis requires both moral conviction and practical decisiveness, and that the weight of history is often borne on the shoulders of individuals whose flaws are inseparable from their strengths. Ultimately, Winston Churchill reminds us that greatness in leadership is rarely pure or uncomplicated. It is forged in the crucible of adversity, shaped by personal experience, and defined by both vision and imperfection. His story exemplifies the delicate balance between inspiration and pragmatism, courage and calculation, determination and vulnerability. Amidst the darkness of war, Churchill emerged as a figure whose impact was as profound as it was enduring, a man whose life continues to illuminate the complexities and responsibilities of power in times of crisis. As we reach the close of this journey through the lives of history's most famous rulers, one truth becomes clear: greatness is rarely simple, and power is never without consequence. From Charlemagne's unifying conquests to Genghis Khan's brutal expansion, Henry VIII's obsession with heirs, Ivan the Terrible's reign of terror, Napoleon's meteoric rise and fall, Queen Victoria's empire and shadows, and Winston Churchill's leadership amidst global catastrophe, each figure offers a complex portrait of ambition, vision, and human flaw. These rulers shaped the course of nations, yet their stories remind us that history is rarely a straight path of glory. It is a landscape of triumph, tragedy, and moral ambiguity. One common thread among these figures is the intertwining of personal desire with public responsibility. Charlemagne sought to unify Europe, yet did so through mass executions and forced conversions. Genghis Khan created a vast empire, combining military genius with strategies of terror. Henry VIII's pursuit of love and heirs reshaped religion and politics, while Ivan the Terrible's paranoia defined the very structure of Russian autocracy. Napoleon's brilliance brought sweeping reform and conquest, but overreach led to exile. Queen Victoria projected moral authority over a global empire, yet lived in personal grief and oversaw colonial exploitation. Churchill inspired a nation during its darkest hour, yet made decisions that cost lives and carried long-term consequences. In every case, ambition, vision, and human weakness were inseparable. These rulers also reveal the double-edged nature of legacy. History often remembers them for their triumphs, monuments, or enduring reforms, yet the darker realities of their actions, the fear they inspired, the lives lost, the suffering caused, are equally part of their stories. The mythology of heroism often overshadows these truths, creating icons who are revered without full recognition of their moral and human complexity. Yet to ignore these dimensions is to misunderstand the very forces that shape the world. Greatness, it seems, is inseparable from imperfection, and the most compelling figures are those who embody both. Another key lesson lies in the exercise of power itself. Whether through the military strategies of Genghis Khan and Napoleon, the legal codes of Charlemagne and Henry VIII, or the symbolic authority of Queen Victoria and Churchill, these rulers understood that leadership requires a combination of vision, decisiveness, and sometimes ruthlessness. Authority was never merely a title, it demanded action, often difficult and morally complex. Their lives illustrate that the wielding of power is both an art and a burden, and that history judges leaders not only by their accomplishments but also by the costs those accomplishments exacted. Moreover, these stories highlight the importance of adaptability and foresight. Charlemagne adapted governance for a fragmented Europe, Genghis Khan united tribal societies through merit and discipline, Napoleon reshaped Europe through innovative military and legal reforms, and Churchill steered Britain through existential threats by balancing strategy with inspiration. Success often depended on the ability to anticipate challenges, respond decisively, and harness both intellect and instinct. Yet, as with Napoleon's Russian campaign or Ivan's violent outbursts, miscalculation or unchecked impulse could lead to catastrophe, underscoring the fragile balance between brilliance and disaster. Finally, the lives of these rulers remind us that history is profoundly human. Behind every coronation, battle, or decree lay a person shaped by circumstance, ambition, and emotion. They were visionary and flawed, courageous and cruel, strategic and impulsive. Their stories are cautionary, inspiring, and endlessly fascinating precisely because they are human. They remind us that the forces shaping history are not abstract, but the product of choices made by individuals whose desires, fears, and intellects leave permanent marks on the world. In reflecting on these titans of history, we are left with a richer understanding of the human condition, the interplay of power, ambition, morality, and consequence. Their lives teach that greatness is complex, often contradictory, and always entwined with the broader currents of human society. They challenge us to confront both the light and shadow of leadership, to recognize the costs of vision and ambition, and to appreciate the delicate balance between legacy and morality. History's rulers, in their triumphs and failures, continue to speak to us across centuries. Their actions shaped nations, redefined societies, and left indelible marks on the world. By examining their lives closely, we gain not only knowledge of the past but insight into the timeless dynamics of power, ambition, and human nature, lessons that remain profoundly relevant today. In the end, the stories of Charlemagne, Genghis Khan, Henry VIII, Ivan the Terrible, Napoleon, Queen Victoria, and Winston Churchill remind us that history is a tapestry woven from both greatness and imperfection, and that the human drive to shape the world is as enduring as it is unpredictable.